All right, so we're going to be talking a little bit about GIS and its application for some work that's being done in Borneo. And many of you who know me know that I've been involved with the Borneo Project for many years. And I'm really pleased to have with us Jetty Ward, who's the executive director of the Borneo Project, and Fiona McAlpine, Fee, who is a communication director at the Borneo Project and also is doing their GIS work. So we're going to be talking a little bit about the GIS things that are happening. And I thought we could start off, Jetty, with a little bit of a background of sort of what the Borneo Project is focusing on these days and the specific project work that led to the GIS project we're going to be talking about.
Sure. So the Borneo Project was started 30 years ago. And we were founded when an activist from Berkeley traveled to Borneo to be a witness to indigenous blockades against logging. So there was a call for international activists to witness the blockades to provide a little bit of security for the people who were on the ground. And since then, it has evolved to a small NGO that supports indigenous-led land rights campaigns and forest protection work. So because we're following what the indigenous communities on the ground are asking for and calling for, our work has always been adjusting and changing according to their needs. It's meant mapping communities with hand-drawn maps to help fight for legal battles in courts for land rights. It's meant community gardens and fighting mega dams. And one of our main focuses right now is called the Baram Heritage Survey. And this is a socio-ecological survey where we have hired and trained people from the communities to collect ecological data. So they're collecting data on animals and on plants and hunting and fishing, as well as socioeconomic data. So they're speaking with people in their communities and getting not only their socioeconomic data, but also talking to them about their visions for the future of their communities. And all of this work, this survey, is laying the groundwork to establish an indigenous managed protected area. So all the communities that we're working with have been actively involved in protecting their forests to different degrees for the last couple decades. And they want to continue doing that. And this survey is strengthening their capacity to manage their lands. It's strengthening the arguments to protect the land. And it's also just getting baseline data so that they can make decisions regarding forest management and wildlife management in the future.
Fee, how did you get involved with this, and how did you start getting involved with GIS?
I think, as Jetty said, it became obvious that we would need to have a GIS system once we started doing the survey, and we had all this amazing location data but had no idea how to use it really. And the way that we landed on using QGIS was really just by accident. It was because it was free and it was easy to use, and we both use Apple products, and so ArcGIS and all the ones that are Windows only were no good for us. So this is how our data looks when it comes back from our field technicians. So we used an app called CyberTracker to build our app that our field technicians use in the field. And then this is how it comes back to us in just a basic spreadsheet format. And we use Google Sheets so that we can work on it in different locations together. And each of these columns is one of the questions in the app, and each of these rows is one of the answers that our field technicians have given. So we have our animal sightings, our animal signs, so footprints and tracks and that kind of stuff, and then our bird sightings as well, which is huge. And date, time, altitude, the transect, how far into the transect, the weather, what type of observation we're looking at, and then the animal that they spotted, how many, the description, and then crucially the latitude and longitude, which was picked up automatically by the phones. We didn't make them type that in.
It's really well structured, and as you move along into the scientific names and so forth, that, you know, all of the names appear exactly the same in every single record, that there's no sort of, you know, one has caps and the other one doesn't, and which is something we call data standardization, and is so important for valid GIS data. And I'm just wondering, how did you come about constructing this sort of the framework for your data in the first place?
So we tried to have as little as possible of manual entry of answers. So we would have a drop-down list of all types of nightjars, or all types of owls, or all types of eagles, and then they would click it so the data comes to us in a standard way. Only if there's something outlier, like an unknown animal, that they would be typing it in themselves. And then we would have to translate and then make sure, you know, same capitalization and spelling and everything, so that it comes up nicely at the other end. So this is one of our sightings. This is a sun bear on the left, very cute. And in the middle is one of our field technicians taking a photo of sun bear scratching. So they're pretty easy to track because they're really messy in the forest. They're not very subtle signs. So the sun bear will climb up, and this was a stingless bee nest. So it would just tear at it with its claws, a hole big enough that it can poke its nose in and start licking all the delicious honey out. So that's what that one is. Ooh. This one is a footprint, believe it or not, that one of our Penang team found. And the next slide shows you that it's a Binturong. And you can see the footprint there. And Binturong are also called bear cats. And they're endemic to Borneo, and they smell like popcorn, apparently. Most of our sightings have been the sign of their smell that the field technicians can detect as they walk through the forest, and it's very, very distinct. These are the gibbons that are found in the Baram region. It's the only ape in the Baram region. And usually we find them by their sound, which anyone who's spent much time in Borneo knows. I can't do the sound. Jetty, can you do the sound? Or Dan?
I can try.
All right.
Might be pretty embarrassing. It's like, they call them, in the indigenous language, they call them wah wah.
What else do we have? Pangolins, very cute. We find them by their hole or their nest, which are really distinct because their scales kind of shave off the edges of the hole. So they have these really smooth edges. And you can also find them by their smell. But our field technicians were just like, oh, it's the smell of pangolin. It doesn't smell like anything else. It's just pangolin smell. So hard to imagine. And the great argus, which is an amazing pheasant, I think, technically. And they find them by their dropped feathers, which are used a lot in traditional dancing and the traditional crafts. Oh, hornbills, yes. Them by their dropped feathers as well, but also lots of visual sightings of the hornbills that we're getting, which are really important, not only culturally, but they're also endangered.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I would like to point out that I have seen Jetty dance the hornbill, and she dances the hornbill better than any person who was not born in Malaysia that I've seen. So
it's getting less and less embarrassing.
You get practice. Everyone gets to try it, right? Well, that's great. Thank you for sharing that. And you know, I think it would be great to just plunge in and just have you kind of walk us through what your QGIS application looks like, and give our GIS audience a little bit of a sense of what it looks like to be operating in that environment.
So QGIS you can just download for free by just Googling QGIS. And I'll start with a blank project because that's how it will look if you download it. And the way that we start is we use these little quick map services buttons to find the base map so that you can see what you're looking at. And I generally use this Google Satellite Hybrid because it has pretty good definition up close, whereas some of the other ones, once you get to Borneo, and you get up close, it just says map not available. So here we have the world. And here we have Borneo. We work in Sarawak, which is this state. And we work in this area, which is the Baram region. And what we can add to our base map, what we played with initially was just Googling Sarawak shapefile. And you can see, you can find the palm oil concessions, you can find protected areas. Global Forest Watch is a really good one for conservation shapefiles. What else? ArcGIS has all the logging concessions. So there's lots of stuff that you can add to your map. And Dan also found a bunch for us as well. I'm not sure where you found them.
Yeah, a lot of that was out on ArcGIS online, and I was a little surprised to find it. You know, it's funny watching you go through that. I was reminded that I have a floppy disks in my office here from some of the early mapping work we were doing in 1995 when there was no data anywhere of any sort.
Sessions, protected areas. And then you can just add them to your map by going layer, add vector layer. And then, oh, my computer's.
No, this is great. You know, some of our audience will be familiar with the shapefile format, which is pretty universal. And for some folks that are less familiar with GIS, that's sort of a pretty standard, if somewhat older data format for GIS layers. So,
and then we can see our little protected areas all around the area where our survey is taking place. So it's kind of useful. And I'll just do that again for the logging concessions. And that's not very useful because it's covering everything. So I'm going to change the properties by right-clicking, going down to properties, and then maybe something see-through. It's a little bit less intrusive. Our maps never look that pretty, I'm sorry. Maybe a bit more opacity. And there we go. So we have a bit of an idea of the threats and some of the protected areas to go with before we even start adding our own data, which is useful. And then this is how we do our own data. So I go back to my Google Sheet. Yeah, we can stick with birds. I go File, Download as a CSV. So it's just downloading that one sheet, not the whole thing as an Excel file. And then I go Layer, and add delimited text layer in my CSVs. And here we have our bird sightings. And QGIS kind of autofills all this stuff, which is very nice of it. So we've got CSV, we've got the long lat that it's picked up automatically because we already have our long lat columns. Yeah, so it's pretty foolproof in that way. And then we add and close, and you can see these are all our birds. We're pretty excited about this transect right up here because it's beyond all the hunting grounds. So that's really quite protected forest from the communities and from the logging companies at the moment, at least, because it's really hard to get to. And it's also quite close to this protected area. And looking a little bit closer, I guess, everything's just come up as the same color. And it's also come up as red, which is not kind to our colorblind friends. So I might just go into here and look in properties and categorize our birds. So they're not coming up all as the same color. And then the value is just the columns that were in my Google Sheet. So I'm going to pick bird and classify those. And then we see we have all of our birds. Apply, okay, and then they're all broken up into categories like that. And it also means over here, I now have a drop-down menu where they've been broken up into categories here as well. So I can go and look and find all of my Buffy fish owls or all of my kingfishers or whatever, which is much more useful than one just big block of red, I think. The other thing that we use quite a lot, so there's all these tools that we don't understand what they are mostly, and then the few that we are using, the properties section, the attributes table, and this little guide, the information. So we can say, okay, we know this transect, for example, is a reserved forest that's really important to the community. So we can go in there and look with our information tool, and it comes up with this identifier. And we can look through this is showing all the stuff in that one transect, all the birds. And any one of those we can click on the view feature form, and then it shows us the same thing basically as our Google Sheet table did show us over there. So the altitude, the weather, the category of birds, and the type of bird, and the long lat, and all that stuff. So we can look at things visually in a section in the way that we wouldn't understand how to do in Google Sheet just based on the long lat.
A couple of observations. First of all, it's really impressive what a robust software platform this is. I mean, really, a lot of the things that you've shown us are things that anyone that has used either ArcMap in the past or ArcGIS Pro currently would recognize and would have a pretty easy time transitioning into. The things that you showed us were really foundational skills, and again, I think you've done an outstanding job of making the leap into really doing GIS. Just watching you navigate through and all the things that you showed. I mean, you're showing standard data types, different data types, bringing in shape files and bringing in CSV files. You really have a foundation here where you can do all sorts of other sorts of, like, proximity analysis is really big. So you were talking about the protected area, and you could run buffers around the protected area to see how the diversity of species, and by the way, this array of birds that you're showing reminds me of why many years ago when I was in Sabah, I met a group of birders that basically for hobby traveled around the world to see the most special birds in the world. I mean, Borneo is a hotspot of biodiversity, and you really reflect it. And I think, the real power of what you're doing is you're bringing field-based information that is based on local knowledge and actual observation on the ground, and you're pulling it into this geospatial environment where now you can represent it and show it. And I know we've had some conversations about how we would visualize this kind of data and how you might analyze this kind of data, which is something that, there's a lot of things that you could potentially do with it depending on what the objectives are. And to your point, Fee, I will go into ArcGIS Pro, and there's, many tools in that software that I've never used, and I don't really even know what they're for. So it is sort of the nature of the beast. They kind of put everything in there thinking that somebody might need to use it at some point.
So here we have our layout view, which we found here. this button with the star then took us to layout, and then we just added a couple of things to show you what it can look like in a printout map for our communities. So I went to add a new map and add a legend, which is this one. And the legend just auto grabbed the categories that I'd already created in properties. And then I also just added scale as well. So I guess for us as newbies to all this stuff, we just wanted to demonstrate that it's actually really easy to learn and really easy to apply in useful ways, even as a beginner using QGIS.
Some people might have guessed that you might not be located in California or on the west coast of North America. So where are you geographically, and how did you connect with the Borneo Project? And then take home or suggestions that you might have for folks that are sort of diving into and getting into to doing GIS.
So I'm in Melbourne in Australia, just watching out the window as a storm rolls in. But I lived in the Bay Area for the last 5 years. So that's how I got connected with the Borneo Project. It wasn't that hard to learn this stuff, and I think it has a really useful application here for us. Training near me, there's lots of GIS people out there who are really willing to share their experience and knowledge. Yeah, so I would encourage people to join the community and find out what's there, because it's pretty welcoming.
So Jetty, where do we go from here with the work that's being done?
Well, we're going to continue collecting data on the ground probably through February. And then once we have everything, we have a team of scientists that is analyzing all the data that we're collecting. So there will be publications and analyses from that end, but we're also going to produce more short-term sort of policy papers that are aimed to facilitate discussion between all stakeholders, including the government. So that's another aspect of this data collection. And then the third element that's really important is bringing this information back to the communities and facilitating discussions on how to use the data, how to ensure that their vision of the future can move forward based on what we've collected, based on the interviews that we've done, based on their hunting and fishing returns. We can say, this is how you're using the land, this is how you've used it in the past, and this is what you've said you want for the future. So how can we facilitate that? How can that happen? So that's another really important part of the survey.
Well, you both are to be commended for your work, and having been involved with the Borneo Project for many years, it's gratifying to see this kind of work being done. And I think that so much is coming out now about the importance not only of biodiversity, but also the importance of indigenous practices and indigenous land management practices to maintain biological diversity. And I think it's just so exciting to see that knowledge being translated into some of these 21st century tools that allow us to be able to visualize things and hopefully chart a better course for the future. So nice work. We'll look forward to seeing you both at the next Borneo Project function.
Sounds good. Thanks, Dan.
Thanks.